Welcome to this Killteam focused episode of Optimal Game State. In this video, we're going to have a look at operatives in Killteam. If you've never played before, we'll be going through all the basics in detail. If you have played before, much of this will be familiar, but hopefully I'll be able to give you some insights as we dig a little deeper into what the numbers mean. In Killteam, our miniatures are referred to as operatives, which are part of a team called a Killteam. Teams like the Intercessor Space Marines can have as few as 6 operatives, or like the Blooded Killteam of Trader Guard can have as many as 14 operatives. Each team will have their own special rules, equipment, ploys, and TAC Ops secondary objectives. Each operative in that team has a data card that gives you all the info you need. On the top left we have the name of the type of operative, in the top middle a picture, on the top right the physical profile. In the middle we have the weapons profile. Often this will include all the possible options, but your operative will be only equipped with some of them. Then at the bottom we have the abilities and unique actions, giving special rules for the operative. The very bottom has a strip with keywords on the left and on the right symbols for specialisms which are used in campaign play. Looking at the physical profile of an operative, we can see they have M for movement, APL for action point limit, GA for group activation, DF for defense, SV for save, and W for wounds. Movement is measured in 2-inch circle increments. I guess in theory they could use another symbol, but right now everything is in circles. The vast majority of operatives have 3 circles for their movement and will be able to move 6 inches with a normal move action. Most actions cost 1 action point, so this tells you how many actions an operative can perform each round. The majority of operatives have 2 APL, with more elite fighters like Space Marines, Void Dancer Troop, and Wormblade special operatives having 3 APL. Typically teams with less operatives will have more APL to balance the lower number of activations. Also, connected to the number of operatives is GA, group activation. Most operatives have this at 1, where it doesn't really matter, but a few have GA 2. These are usually the generic troops in teams with many operatives, like Trooper Veterans, Navis Armsmen, or as we have here, Recruit Warriors. This goes towards mitigating the number advantage large teams have, but can also be used proactively, letting you chain multiple activations together. Next up we have the 3 defensive stats: defense, save, and wounds. When you get shot at, you get to roll a number of dice equal to the operative's defense stat. For every dice that beats the save value, you get a save, with 6s counting as a critical save. These are used to reduce incoming damage, and anything left over is subtracted from your wounds. If the operative has cover, they can make 1 dice a success instead of having to roll it. Almost all operatives roll 3 dice. The save value varies depending on the armor, so Space Marines are typically 3+, while armored operatives like Tau, Novitiates, and Skitarii are 4+, and the majority of the rest are at 5+. We can loosely divide operatives into 3 types: light armor, which will on average make 1 save, medium armor, which will on average make 1.5 saves, and heavy armor, which will on average make 2 saves. The last stat is wounds. For reference, a typical human is sitting at 7 to 8 wounds. Many of the Xenos are between 8 and 10, with Space Marines coming in at 12 to 16. Typically, the leader of a kill team will have an extra 1 wound compared to the rest of their squad. As an operative takes damage, you track the total, and if it ever equals their total wounds, then the operative is removed from play. As an extra quirk of the game, if the operative takes more than half their total wounds and damage, then they become injured and lose a circle of movement, with their ballistic skill and melee skills each getting 1 point worse. Of course, to properly understand the defensive stats, we need to look at an attack. Here we have the trusty lasgun. The target symbol at the start indicates it's a ranged weapon. The other option is 2 crossed blades, indicating melee. Unless otherwise noted, a ranged weapon can shoot anything it can see on the table. The engagement range in Killteam is so short that anything is within the effective range for a lasgun. Each weapon has 3 characteristics. A for attacks is the number of dice you roll. BS/WS is ballistic skill or weapon skill, which indicates what you need to roll to score a hit. So in this case, you roll 4 dice, and dice of 4 or more are considered a hit. If you roll a 6, that's considered a crit. The last weapon stat is damage, which is split into hit damage and crit damage. After you work out the final number of hits that do damage, you look at these to work out the total damage that is actually done. So let's look at an example. In this case, we've rolled the 4 dice for the lasgun. The 1 and 2 are below the ballistic skill and are misses. The 4 is a hit, while the 6 is a crit. So right now this attack is doing a total of 5 damage, 2 for the hit and 3 for the crit. After the attack has been made, the defender gets to roll. In this case, the 3 fails to save as it's under the save value of 5+, but the 2 5s are successful saves. When resolving saves, you can use a save or a critical save to discard a normal hit, but to discard a critical hit, you need a critical save or 2 normal saves. So in this example, the defender can either use a normal save to discard the normal hit, and then have the remaining save unable to discard the crit, or they can spend the 2 normal saves to discard the crit, leaving the remaining normal hit to go through, causing 2 wounds. Melee follows a similar process to shooting, but rather than rolling the fence dice, the defender rolls their own melee attack. Then starting with the attacker, each player alternates selecting one of their hits or crits, and choosing to strike or parry with it. A strike will do immediate damage, while a parry will remove opponent's dice in the same way as the fence dice did. At first, melee can seem quite complicated, but after dice are rolled, the resolution process is often a formality. The first question you need to ask is whether a kill is possible. This occurs when one combatant is able to strike enough damage for a kill before the other opponent can parry it away. If that's the case, the operative who can make the kill usually does so, as dead enemies can't hit back, while the doomed operative will strike for as much damage as they can in the few moments they have left. The second question is, what's the maximum damage you can inflict, and what's the minimum damage you can receive? If a combatant has more successful dice than their opponent, then they may be able to parry away the majority of their opponent's dice and then use the remaining dice as strikes. The final question is perhaps the most important. What is the most desirable of the possible outcomes? Sometimes losing an operative to inflict a little bit more damage on a more valuable opponent is a good thing. Other times, just parrying everything to make sure your operative survives to hold an objective will be the better call. Better weapons will have more hits and will do better damage. As damage is done in fixed chunks of hits and crits, it can be worth considering how those chunks relate to the wounds you need to kill a target. A typical human, as we've said before, is 7 to 8 wounds. A weapon doing 2 hit, 3 crit damage is going to need 4 hits, or 3 hits and a crit, while a weapon doing 3 hit and a 4 crit damage just needs a hit and a crit to kill a 7 wound human. Similarly, a far better weapon with 5 hit and 6 crit damage profile still needs 2 hits, making it only slightly better than the 3 hit, 4 crit weapon against a human target. If that was the game, we'd do up some basic average numbers and that would tell us what's good and what's not. There are, however, a ton of weapon special rules that change how things work. There really are too many to go over, but I'll give a quick summary of some of the important ones here. For ranged and melee, there are 3 different reroll options. Ceaseless lets you reroll all 1s, Balanced lets you reroll 1 of your attack dice, Relentless lets you reroll any or all of your attack dice. Relentless is obviously the best. Balanced typically is better than Ceaseless, but Ceaseless improves as you get more attack dice and as your skill gets better. At skill 2+, Ceaseless is basically the same as Relentless. The lethal special rule changes the number you crit on. More crits mean more damage, and it makes it harder for the target to make saves. It also increases the damage of triggering critical hit rules, which are effects that come into play if you have at least 1 crit on an attack. There are 3 main critical effects you'll see. Mortal wounds do X damage for each crit. You then continue as normal with the remainder of the damage resolution, so these wounds cannot be stopped by a defense roll. Rending will let you turn a normal hit into a crit, so if you get a crit and no hits, it has no effect, but if you get a crit and a hit, you end up with 2 crits. The third is piercing, which activates armor penetration. Some weapons already have armor penetration, and this special rule reduces the amount of dice the defender gets to roll by whatever the number is. Now, we know the vast majority of defenders have 3 dice, and the AP values range from 1 to 2. The difference between light, medium, and heavy armor is the save value. A better save value means each dice is more valuable, so AP is going to be better against a heavier armor operative. Some operatives will have invulnerable saves, which cannot be modified by AP. Typically these will be alternate saves, worse than their normal save, so the AP will have some impact even if it's not as much as usual. With enough maths, you can work out the averages for every weapon. Here I've worked out the averages for weapons against light, medium, and heavy armor. I'll have a link in the comments so you can scan through it. The numbers aren't quite right, but they're decent enough to illustrate some points. First, some of the lower damage weapons are on average doing no damage against heavy armor. Essentially, the average of 2 dice removed from the attack is more than is expected to hit. Second, weapons good against heavy armor are good against light armor. This plot is sorted by damage against heavy armor, and you can see there are some peaks with the light and medium armor, so there are some weapons that do the same amount of damage against a heavy target, but do different amounts of damage against a light armor. When the difference is large, the armor is being more effective, so having lots of hits or removing defensive dice with AP will minimize that. Having less dice, but more damage increases the difference. That said, having more damage does do more damage. The weapons that do more against a heavy armored target are also doing more against a light armored target. There are 2 weird blips where damage versus light, medium, and heavy are the same or very close. Those are the digital laser and the shock pistol, which both do most of their damage with mortal wounds, completely ignoring armor. I think that's about all we can wring out of the operative data cards. I haven't looked at abilities or unique actions, which are at the bottom of the card, and that's because there's a ton of variety there and you really need to assess each operative's ability on its own. Speaking of which, this isn't the case of just picking the best operatives with the best stats and the best guns. Each operative is part of a team, and to properly understand an operative, you'll need to view them in context within their team. To do this fully, you'll need to look at all the various operatives within the team, as well as the special abilities that the team brings. That's not something we're going to be able to do within this short video. What we can do is give a high-level view of the teams, looking at the total number of operatives they have, the total number of action points within the team, and the total number of wounds they have. There are obviously variations across operatives within the teams, but for the most part we can get a general number for these. I've ordered these by action points, as they generally are quite important. Starting at the bottom, we have the Space Marine teams. These all have a low number of activations, but typically will get more bang for their buck. Warp Coven are at the bottom, but 3 of those operatives are the Thousand Sun Sorcerers. You can push the number up by taking more Zangor, as the Thousand Suns count as 2 selections. But the 3 Sorcerer, 2 Rubric Marines and 2 Zangor are the go-to version. The other Astartes team, the Legionaries, the Phobos and the Intercessors, are all quite similar in ways. Only 6 operatives, but 3 APL each, and all will have heavy armor and some great weapons. Interestingly, the Intercessors are considered one of the better kill teams out there, while the Phobos Strike team are one of the weaker. So you can't just look at the APL and know the best kill teams. You really need to get into the details. Skipping ahead, we have a few more matched pairs with big disparities. The Novitiates and the Commandos have the same numbers, but Novitiates are near the top while Commandos near the bottom. It's the same with the Krut Kin band, who are generally considered quite poor, and the Hunter Clade, who received an extra operative in one of the recent updates, and now are considered one of the best teams around. In the last set, we have some of the Horde teams. Although Harlequins managed to squeeze in by virtue of their insane 24 APL, with 8 operatives all with 3 APL each. This is mitigated slightly by them being quite squishy at 8 to 9 wounds, once you get past their invulnerable saves. The remaining 4 teams all have some interesting options that impact the numbers, with many of them having better operatives that cost 2 slots. For some, like the Wormblade and Pathfinders, they seem to be the right choice. For others, like the Navy Breachers, they're probably better off dropping the Cat and the Guy Skull, as I've done here, while the Blooded as-is are running the Ogren and the Enforcer, but they might be better off trading the Enforcer in for another 2 Troopers. Key part here is it's important to understand the kill team in the greater whole, so you can properly assess operatives and vice versa. Hopefully you enjoyed going through that. I know we were getting deep into the woods on occasion, but hopefully you've got a better understanding of operatives. By not using points, the designers have given themselves a tricky balancing act. I do think it was a right approach, as it avoids spamming for the most efficient operative and loosely reflects an actual combat unit. For competitive players, there are still plenty of options, and the way you build your team for each battle out of a roster lets you tailor your team to specific scenarios and matchups. The recent US Open was a good example of this, where battles alternated between normal open terrain and the tight into the dark scenery. At the same time, casual players like myself can just pick up a team, work through some of the simple choices and get them on the table. There definitely are differences in strength between the teams, but honestly they're not that big. Even though we can put together a tier list based on competitive games, the overall balance is relatively good. My personal recommendation would be to try build a slightly unbalanced game, and then give the better team to your friend to play, as you should have a slightly better idea how to win the game yourself. Thanks for making it all the way to the end. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Each week I put up a new video talking about one of Games Workshop's specialist games. The goal is always to try and make the best possible two-player experience. If this is something you'd find interesting, please subscribe to the channel and comment to let me know what you'd like to see in future.